Congressman Lieu, Americans watching would be permitted for wondering, what did I just hear?
Right.
Why does this keep happening? What does it mean when you look up on the news going into the midterms and people are being indicted in real time, innocent until proven guilty, but indicted for new meddling?
I think this indictment of the Russian operative is significant for at least three reasons. First, it's not just Russian interference in our elections in 2016, it's now in 2018. Second, this was not a small operation. Based on public reporting, we're talking about at least $35 million, and this is one of many operations that the Kremlin engages in. And third, I think what's interesting is you have the Department of Justice, the head of the FBI, putting country over party. Clearly, this is not a topic Donald Trump wants to talk about, but yet you have these Trump officials putting this out before the American people because they realize that interference in our elections is so important.
Which you view as a positive at a time where we're told so many things aren't working. You view that as working, and this would be a kind of potential exception to the attempt, not just by the special counsel, but DOJ writ large, to stay quiet before the midterms, but you can't be quiet about an ongoing effort if you think it's illegal and is designed to subvert the midterms.
That's correct. So there's what Donald Trump thinks and then what everybody else thinks. And in his administration, they realize the Russian threat to our elections is real. They're trying to stop it. And they want to warn Americans that that Facebook post or Twitter post you see may be coming from the Kremlin, not from someone down the street.
Betsy Woodruff, how do you view this in the context of the wider reporting you do on the Russia probe? As always, we can talk about the caveats. Nothing here about collusion and nothing here that ballparks the scale of this. Any crime, any single crime is bad. Crimes that have mass impact are worse. But with those caveats said, how do you view this, and what does it say about what the DOJ is doing?
The important thing to remember that this new indictment highlights, but which we knew before, is that Russian meddling didn't stop on Election Day 2016. The Russians had been endeavoring to influence American politics prior to the 2016 election. They dramatically amped up that activity during the 2016 election, and they kept it going in the subsequent months, and now, as this indictment indicates, in the subsequent years. That's because the Russians' project, based on everything we know, both what the intelligence community has found, what reporters have found, what we understand from talking to people who are close to the Kremlin, who understand the way the Kremlin works, is that the project wasn't solely or even simply get Trump elected, but broadly trying to sow a lack of confidence, trying to undermine confidence and faith in American democratic institutions. One of the top priorities of Putin and his government is making democracies around the world sort of doubt their competence, doubt the integrity of their governments. We see this not just in the United States, but in the Baltics, in Ukraine, in Georgia, throughout Eastern Europe, and other countries that are in Russia's sphere of influence. So it shouldn't surprise anyone that this malign activity has been continuing, and frankly, we should expect to see these efforts from the Russians continue, honestly, for years to come.
Before I turn to Howard and turning the page to Roger Stone, Congressman, I want to ask you about one more piece of this, which is with foreign crimes, you always have the gavel, which is what our justice system can do, and the hammer, which is the full foreign policy power of the United States. And so moving apart from the DOJ, the wider concern here is that, as Betsy said, this will continue, but it will continue even more aggressively if there is a view that the United States under Donald Trump never uses the hammer on Russia. I want you to take a look at something Frank Figliuzzi, who has a lot of experience in this, said in response to not the old indictments, but the new stuff. Take a look.
Had nothing to do with my campaign.
They continue to do it because they feel they have impunity. They feel that there's a president here that's not going to call them out on it. He's not stopping them. We've had over 24 Russians and Russian intelligence officers indicted for meddling, for hacking, for social propaganda. We've tied it directly to at least the colonel level of the Russian GRU, and yet our president does not come out and call them out on it and demand that they stop.
Do you think Frank's right that the president not ever using the hammer is basically provocative and brings these attacks on us?
He is absolutely right. There was bipartisan outrage when Donald Trump kowtowed in front of Vladimir Putin at the Helsinki summit. But what the Russians see from that is that the president of the United States is not going to do very much against the Russians for meddling in our elections. when Donald Trump keeps saying this is a hoax, this is a witch hunt, that just incentivizes the Russians to keep trying to attack us. And that's why they've been so brazen. And I'm pleased that at least the Department of Justice officials under Donald Trump see this differently. They're going to go after these Russians and try to do what they can to stop this meddling.
And while that's going on, Howard, the Russia probe continues the investigations. The reporting we had this week that Manafort, who was, as I mentioned, in court today, is being asked about Roger Stone. And walk us through what you know from your reporting, the history of their relationship and what you heard from Mr. Stone today.
Right. Well, before I get to that, if you don't mind, for one quick second, I would say to bring it back to the United States, not just the Ukraine and Balkans and so forth. What we're seeing here, every time I think I've seen everything, I see something new in this. What's happening here is the offshoring of obstruction of justice. By interfering in the Mueller probe, the Russians are basically doing the administration's bidding in terms of trying to obstruct justice. And that's amazing. And not to mention the fact that the same money guy in Russia who was behind the 2016 efforts, apparently, is also the guy behind the activities that were indicted, that led to the indictment today. As for Roger Stone and Paul Manafort, they've known each other since the 70s, literally. They've had an on-again, off-again relationship personally, but they've basically been allies in terms of politics and money for all that time. If there's anybody on the planet who can explain Roger Stone, it's Paul Manafort. Paul Manafort has spent 50 to 60 hours at least talking to the investigators, at least partly, I'm assuming, about Roger Stone. And don't forget, Roger Stone seemed to indicate that he had some advanced knowledge of what was coming down about the emails. Roger Stone has flatly denied that in a over and over again. But he also sent me a text today when I asked him about it that I thought was interestingly and carefully worded. He said, Manafort knows nothing whatsoever to contradict what I have said previously. There is no collusion, etc. And the fact that he said that Manafort knows nothing to contradict what I have said sounds to me at least a little bit carefully worded here. And really one could argue that Donald Trump himself was inviting publicly the Russians to interfere, and I think that's in the famous statement that he made about how, you know, please, Russia, if you've got those emails, let's see the emails. That, to me, and I think probably in Mueller's mind, in and of itself is evidence of collusion, and if anybody would know about that, it would be Roger Stone.
And so, Howard, that you talk about their link, the director of Get Me Roger Stone, who obviously picked up on a very newsworthy subject in his profile, was on the beat last night talking about how it was Roger who elevated Manafort, and be careful what you wish for. Take a look.
Ironically, even though this was Manafort's opportunity to get back on the national stage in an extremely important role, it ultimately has proven to be his undoing.
You've done some hard reporting there. I'd like you to do some soft speculation, if you're willing. It is television,
yes.
Howard.
Yes.
What is going through Donald Trump's mind as he thinks about these two people, one being wheeled into a courthouse today with Bob Mueller controlling his future, the other on the outside still talking tough, Mr. Stone, and what they know?
Well, I was covering the campaign when Manafort came into the picture. I think it's probably fair to say that Roger Stone had something, not definitive power, but had some in suggesting that Paul Manafort would be a good guy to run the campaign at that time. When Roger did that, you know, he knew that he was going to get a guy in power there in the campaign that Roger Stone, had worked with on and off for 40 years. So I think that's a relationship that's got to be one of the things that Mueller is looking at very carefully. As you said, Roger Stone flatly denies that he had any involvement in any kind of collusion and so forth. But it's Bob Mueller's job and his assignment to pick apart every detail, to set up the timeline, to figure out what Roger knew when he knew it. And I think that is going to be more important in the long run than perhaps we might have thought at the very beginning.
Betsy, final thought on all the above.
The important thing to remember with the Mueller probe is that it's simultaneously a criminal investigation and a counterintelligence investigation. There are two different silos. As these indictments come out, and if any future Mueller indictments come out, they will cast significant light on the ways the Russians tried to influence the election process in 2016. However, Mueller is also gathering an enormous amount of information that will never see the light of day because it's going to be related to the way that the United States